Efendim yoruldunuz biliyoruz. Az sonra kahve molası vereceğiz. Kahveden daha kuvvetli bir içeceğe ihtiyaç duyanlar için akşam 19'da resepsiyonumuz var, kokteylimiz var. Orada içkilerimiz de olacak. Bu arada dikkatinizi sağ taraftaki ekrana vermek istiyorum. Bakın TT olduk İstanbul'da. Türkiye'de trend topik olmayı başardık. Sayenizde sosyal medya çok önemli biliyorsunuz. 7 milyon kişiye ulaştık bugün. İDEKO'nun sizlere ilettiği bu kartlarda isterseniz siz de sosyal medyada daha aktif olmak üzere iletişim bilgilerinizi yazabilirsiniz. Sırf bugün özel QR kodları düzenlendi. Cep telefonlarınızda bunları okutabilir, bugünkü zirveye ait bütün bilgileri de bunlardan alabilirsiniz. Sevgili konuklarımız Bitlis'ten, Kütahya'dan, Mersin'den bugün aramızda olan çok değerli katılımcılarımız var. Ayrıca dünyanın dört bir yanından gelenler de var demiştik. Bunların arasında Kıbrıs, Hollanda, Sırbistan, Hırvatistan, Bulgaristan, Azerbaycan var. Azerbaycan ekibinden ki bir kısmını orada görüyorum. Bazı fireler vermişiz. Öyle değil mi? Bir temsilci Lamia Bayramoğlu'nun bir küçük sürprizi var. Başkanımız Sayın Gülden Türktan'a. Lamia. Sayın Başkan. Size de hediye vermemizin zamanı geldi efendim. Azerbaycan'dan geldi. Mikrofonu açabilir miyiz?
Sayın KAGİDER Başkanı, üyeleri ve misafirlerimiz, biz bugün Azerbaycan'dan büyük bir delegasyonla burada temsil oluyoruz. Ve onların adından size teşekkürlerimi iletmek isterim. Türkiye bizim ikinci evimiz, biz burada olmaktan çok mutluyuz. Çok teşekkürler. Biz kardeşiz, bir milletiz ve tabii ki evimizde ağırlanmaktan çok mutluyuz. Tekrar teşekkür ederim size. Başarılarınızın devamını dilerim. Nice 10 senelerinizin geçirmenizi dilerim. Türkiye'nin daha başka illerinden sesinizin gelmesini dilerim. Ve ben bugün arkadaşlarım adına, kendileri adına bir daha teşekkürlerimi sunarım size. Bizde halı çok eski bir meslektir biliyorsunuz. Ve bu tarihsel bir konuda bağdaşıyor. Ve halının uzun ömürlü bir anlamı vardır. O yüzden ben bugün halını takdim etmek istiyorum size ki uzun ömürlü olsun sizin kurumunuz.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. KAGİDER yazıyor, süper.
Bizim Fatma Hanım var, iş kadını, onun halı genç kızları halı öğretiyor ve bu onun işte firmasında olan kızlar el dokumasıyla KAGİDER yazmışlar ve böyle bir motiflerle işlemişler. Aygün firması halı yüzü.
Biz de Azerbaycanlı kardeşlerimizin burada olmasından son derece mutluyuz. Orada iş geliştiği zaman Türkiye'de iş gelişmiş kadar memnun ve mutlu oluyoruz. Ve birlikte hareket ederek daha iyi yapmak için çalışmaya hazırız. Halı işini de bırakmayın öneririm. Devam. Çalışmaya devam.
Çok
Teşekkür ederim. Hepinize başarılar dilerim. Mutluluklar dilerim. Tabii bugün kotadan konuşulduğu iş kadınları, erkekler bizi kabullensin diyoruz ama bir de kendimize dönelim. Bir kendimiz belki birbirimizi destekleyelim. Köstek olmayalım, destek olalım ki onlar da bizi kabullensinler. Çok teşekkürler.
Çok doğru.
Sağ olun.
Sözlere alkış. Hep beraber sizi kahveye davet ediyorum şimdi. 10 dakika sonra yeniden bu salonda buluşacağız son oturumumuz için. Teşekkürler.
Çıkartalım mı kalsın mı?
Kalsın.
Bence.
Ki kalıcı çözümler için önce zihniyet değişimi lazım. Tabii bunu söylemesi kolay. Bu tür bir değişim en zor olanı, en çok vakit alanı. Ama biz şimdi bu oturumda zihniyet dönüşümünü, değişimini tartışıyor ve konuşuyor olacağız. Güçlenen kadınlar, beklenen zihniyet değişimi, farklı bak, farklı gör konulu oturumumuzun değerli moderatörünü ve konuşmacılarımızı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Bu arada bu oturumda konuşmacı olacak olan UNDP Toplumsal Cinsiyet Eşitliği Direktörü Winnie Bianima, Sandy kasırgası nedeniyle evi ağır hasar gördüğü için gezisini dün akşam iptal etmek zorunda kaldı. Bu notu da sizlere iletmiş olalım. Alkışlarınızla ödüllü gazeteci, stratejist ve eğitmen Simran Sethi'yi sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Miss Sethi. Simran Sethi, daha sonrasında Intel Türkiye Orta Doğu ve Afrika Bölge Direktörü Ayşegül İldeniz, yine alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyoruz. EBRD Sosyal Politikalar Baş Danışmanı Mikaela Bergman, kendisini sahneye davet ediyoruz. Gender Task Force kurucu ve genel direktörü Marianne Rukafina Spetic, alkışlarınızla sahneye geliyor. Miss Sethi'yi davet edebildik mi? Evet. Ve moderatörümüz gazeteci Aslı Sözbilir. Hoş geldiniz efendim. Söz sizin.
Merhaba, günün son oturumuna hepiniz hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Günün son oturumu olduğu için biraz dikkatler dağılmış olabilir ama lütfen hepimiz dikkatleri buraya toplayalım. Çünkü kendi alanlarında öne çıkmış 4 kadın liderle kadın liderliğini konuşacağız. Aynı zamanda kadınların yükselmelerinin önündeki engelleri ve zihniyet değişimi konusunda neler yapabileceğimizi konuşacağız. Ben saat itibariyle biraz hepimiz salonda sıkılmış olabileceğimizden hemen konuşmacılara geçmek istiyorum. Aslında ilk sözü de biraz torpil yaparak meslektaşım Sayın Simran Sethi'ye vermek istiyorum. Simran Sethi bir gazeteci, söylediğim gibi aynı zamanda kendisini sürdürülebilir çevre konularına adamış bir akademisyen, eğitmen ve bize bugün aslında konuşmasında sürdürülebilir bir çevre için kadın erkek eşitliğinin önemli, bu dengenin nasıl sağlanabileceğini aktaracak ve aynı zamanda sosyal medya, yükselen bir güç olan sosyal medyanın kadının yükselmesindeki öneminden bahsedecek. Buyurun Sayın Sethi. Floor is yours.
Thank you. There's a slight delay because of the translation for me. I'm so grateful to be here today, and thank you all for staying through this beautiful and very long day. I would like to start off really looking at this question of mindset. And in my work as an environmental advocate, I have really tried to understand why people engage in environmental issues and why they don't. We all have a vested interest in these issues, and it really inspired me to start to look at and try to understand the psychology behind how we engage with and in the world. This led me to looking at what I call the gendered brain, and trying to think about, really building off what Hala said at the last session, what it means to lead like a woman. And as I talk about this, I want to also honor and recognize what Mikaela had said earlier about preaching to sort of the people who already understand. I recognize that we need to go beyond the people in this room. However, I think we first have to start by inspiring each other and informing each other. So I hope I'm laying some of the groundwork for understanding a bit more about kind of some of the differences that we talk about in kind of intuitive ways, but maybe we haven't looked at in a more in-depth kind of psychological and physiological perspective. Sharon Hadari at the Center for Women's Business Research, which is based in Washington, D.C., explains that women actually come to business increasingly with professional experience that's growing more similar to men's. But they approach business in very different ways. And it's what I love Sheryl Sandberg, the Chief Operating Officer at Facebook, has described as the effort of leaning in. And that's what I want to highlight a few examples of, the psychology and the stories behind these kinds of ways that we exist as women in the world, leaning into each other instead of stepping away from each other, and leaning into the challenges of the world, the social and environmental challenges that we're facing. Neuropsychiatrist Luann Brizendine researched this idea of the gendered brain, and she realized that after 8 weeks in utero, as babies are gestating, the fetus is gestating, all babies' brains, all fetuses' brains are exactly the same, and they are all female. Female is nature's default setting. It's only after a surge of testosterone that boys' brains begin to look male. And our female brain might be the reason that little girls play better together, and that girls have stronger verbal ability at a younger age, and may be able to negotiate sharing better than boys. I say maybe because this research is still in process and happening now. But just as little boys and little girls' brains are different, adult men and adult women, as you well know, act differently. Male business owners are much more likely to prefer what we have come to call left brain thinking, characterized by logic, facts, and hierarchy. Now women, which I know you've heard this before, use our right brains more. We are more intuitive, more creative. We work toward building relationships, and we lead with our values. But I don't want you to get the impression that women are soft, only soft, right? Because we actually tend to use our brain, our right and left brain, equally. But what I want to focus on is, and what we tend to focus on is what's important to us, our values. We want to build relationships, but we also want that facts and logic. And I think that's a critical distinction to make. The public idea that women have very nurturing qualities is very real, but these qualities do not come at the expense of the same qualities that men possess. They are manifested in kind of different calibrations and different situations. Judy Wicks is a restaurateur, and I think she exemplifies this very well in the United States. In the United States, I should back up and say, before the crisis, the economic crisis, some of the research that was done showed that women-owned businesses from 1997 to 2007 grew 46%. And the sector grew twice as fast as men-owned businesses and added roughly 500,000 jobs, while privately owned firms lost jobs. The highest jobs were in education and healthcare, but they were also jobs in non-traditional, more masculine sectors. And what that has resulted in within the United States is a transformation of what is traditionally considered women's work. We also heard this in the last session. And this brings me back to Judy. Judy is a restaurateur of a cafe called the White Dog Cafe. She founded this business out of her kitchen in her home, baking breakfast muffins. But her goal was never to bake muffins. Her goal was to create spaces where people could come together to share and connect. And she said, my goal was to serve. So her now 29-year-old restaurant is a place that works with local farmers, that works with local suppliers to create a robust menu and a very popular and lucrative restaurant. But it's also a communal space where speakers are invited from all over the world to share their perspectives on various issues, and that people are encouraged to come together and sit together at a common table. So this is what I mean when I say that Judy is working with both her left and right brain. And I think it's critical to start to consider how this manifests throughout the world. I want to highlight that also in Africa, female entrepreneurship is higher than anywhere else in the world. 2 out of 3 women in Africa are part of the labor force. And in part of the labor force and in part of the work that's being done is really thinking about creative ways to problem solve. There's a woman named Bethlehem Tilahan, who's the founder of a Ugandan shoe company called Soul Rebels. And she said that her company was founded as a response to a singular narrative about poverty alleviation in Africa. Right? She started in 2004 with a handful of artisans in Ethiopia, and her business is now a $2 million business with 100 workers. Through fair trade, through ecologically friendly products, and through 100% local inputs, she has worked to transform the story of Africa. I talk about story because one of the things that you also know is that women are talkers. We use our verbal abilities and we express stronger verbal abilities. And I want to cite some of the research here because it's important to understand that these things are actually coming from, not from simply a communal place or a sociological place, but from a physiological place. So as we look at relationships, we understand that women tend to foster co-opetition, sharing knowledge and expertise with competitors to make an entire industry stronger. Right? And this is actually something that happens through dialogue and through an understanding that women look toward each other and outside of their field to garner information. So the way that we develop our understanding of the world is not only through finding information with intimate relationships, but it's finding information outside of our comfort zones and outside of our circles. It's also found in a third way, which is looking to the people who will be impacted by our decisions. And some of these decisions are incredibly difficult to make. I want to highlight one decision that's been made here within Turkey, and that is in Bergama and in Truva around gold mining. Mining is one of the most environmentally destructive practices in existence. The price of gold, ladies, is much higher than what we pay for a piece of jewelry. And I highlight this, and I'll wrap up what I'm saying with some of this to say that these are the choices that women are being asked to make every day. And that every woman, every man in this room has an opportunity to not only work toward their own livelihoods and to build up their own communities, but to help speak for and support women who may not be able to make the same choices that we are able to make. If you're not familiar with this situation, really what happened was local citizens, and many of you in this room are probably more familiar than I am, but local citizens, and we can map this onto many environmental injustices throughout the world, local citizens were asked to give over their land for mining, gold mining. Now, the problem is it not only changes the makeup of the soil, the makeup of the water. The arsenic can't be removed from the water, which is how we extract the gold, but it changes and transforms the culture of a place. So the heritage of the place is also what's being impacted by these kinds of decisions. We feel, I think, great compassion for the decisions that people had to make to feed their families and to support themselves. And when the mining company came and said, "We will offer you a high price for your land," many people said yes. But the price that is paid for this lack of sustainability is one that we will all pay for generations to come. And because not everyone can afford to demand changes, I think this is what we have the opportunity to do. Studies have shown that women are more likely than men to support environmental causes through activism, through voting, and through consumer choices. Daphne Koryak, who is worked on the slow food campaign here on the Luferd fish, has, I think, really helped exemplify what that can look like, working with fishermen, working with chefs, to work through legislation to help change the kind of fishing practices that we're seeing right here in Turkey. There are many other examples of this, but I'll end here to say that when we empower women, when we provide capital and make financial capital accessible to women, when we provide human capital, natural capital, and financial capital, what we see is a transformation of society. We still have a lot of work to do. In the research that I've been able to garner, in Turkey, women-owned businesses represent nearly 40% of registered micro, small, and medium enterprises, but only 15% have access to finance. But it is with the support of KAGİDER and the organization's holistic approach to empowering girls, to supporting women entrepreneurs, and to supporting the whole community of entrepreneurship, I know that we can continue to grow. I know that we will continue to lead using our brains and our hearts, and we will continue together to lean in. Thank you.
Sayın Seti'ye teşekkür ediyoruz. Süresini çok aşmadığı için de teşekkür ediyoruz. 5 dakika kadar aştı. Ben tam müdahale edecektim. O konuşmasını bitirdi. Çok teşekkürler. İkinci konuşmacımız aslında erkeklerin çok iddialı olduğu bir alandan bir kadın lider. Bilişim alanından Sayın Ayşegül İldeniz, kendisi Bilişim Devi Intel'in Türkiye, Orta Doğu ve Afrika Başkanı, Bölge Başkanı. Kendisiyle eşitlik için ihtiyaç duyduğumuz zihniyet değişiminde özel sektörde kadın liderlerin nasıl farklar yaratabileceklerini ve bu son dönemdeki teknolojideki gelişimin ve yaygınlığın kadın hakları ve cinsiyet normları üzerine olan etkisini konuşacağız. Bize bunlardan bahsedecek. Buyurun Sayın Deniz.
Teşekkür ederim Aslı Hanım. Before I start my speech, a warm heart welcome to all our international guests of joining us in Istanbul. It's wonderful to be with a group of distinguished individuals like yourselves, men and women, and very, very important to share our opinions. If you will allow me, since I'm in my own city, I'll continue in Turkish. Hoş geldiniz öncelikle. Şu cümleyle başlamak istiyorum. Geçen yıl G20'de Muhammed Yunus'la birlikteydik bir konuşma sırasında ve dedi ki insanlık tarihinde ilk defa gençlerin elinde dünyayı değiştirebilecek bir gereç var dedi. Bugüne kadar hiç bu kadar yaklaşmamışlardı. Her şeyi bu kadar hızlı değiştirmeye dedi ve teknolojiden, internetten bahsediyordu. Çok büyük bir cümle aslında ama son 10 yıl içinde çalıştığım ülkelerde hiç durmadan, kendi ülkemde öncelikle olmak üzere bunu gözlemleyen, gören, yaşayan, hisseden bir insan olarak daha doğru bir özetleyici cümle bilmiyorum. İnsanların bu son 10 yılda geçirdiği değişimden aslında birkaç saat önce Suudi Arabistan'dan indim Türkiye'ye. Bir süredir de gitmiyordum oraya. Tabii çok ekstrem bu şartları gören bir kadın olarak aynı sizler gibi ekstremleri yaşayan bir ülkede var olan biri olarak değişimi izlemek belki de daha kolay hepimiz için. O anlamda kadınlara girmeden önce izninizle aslında bireydeki değişimden 2 dakika bahsetmek istiyorum. Sonra da belki kadına ancak öyle girebiliriz. Dünyadaki bireydeki değişimin bugün bu teknoloji ve internet sayesinde ciddi bir enformasyonda eşitlik ve aynı seviyeye gelmenin çok hızlı olduğunu görüyoruz. Ve belki de gelişmiş ülkelerle gelişmekte olan ülkeler arasındaki farklılıkların da teknoloji sayesinde çok daha hızlı bir şekilde kapandığını ve bu bireyin ortaya çıktığı yepyeni bir kültürde gelişmekte olan ülkelerde de var olan insanların, Türkiye'de de, Orta Doğu'da da, Asya'da da, Afrika'da da, Latin Amerika'da da aslında bugün yaptıkları şeylerin batılı ülkelerde yaşayan insanlardan çok da farkı olmadığını ve ekonomik gücün de hızla başka taraflara doğru kaydığını, birey merkezli bu operasyon diyeceğim adına değişimin de dünyanın her tarafına yayıldığını hızla görüyoruz. Örnekleri biraz önce duydunuz, bütün gün boyunca yapılan konuşmadan duydunuz. Burada kişisel özellikler olarak ortaya çok yeni bir kültür belki de çıkıyor. Bizim yaşadığımız, işte benim yaşadığım 60'lar, 70'ler, 80'lerden çok daha farklı bir bireyin odaklı olduğu, kişisel inisiyatifin odaklı olduğu, sizin ne düşündüğünüzün toplumun ne düşündüğünden daha önemli olduğu, o anlamda da kişisel fikrinizin olması gerektiği ama bununla beraber de bir risk alma zorunluluğun ortaya çıktığı ve interneti bu şekilde yaşayabilen, birbirinden daha bağımsız ama aktif ve konuşan bireylerin oluştuğu bir toplum bir bakıma ortaya çıktı. Bu yepyeni şeyde aslında Türk olmak ne demek, gelişmekte olan ülkelerden olmak ne demek, bir Afrikalı olmak ne demek, bir kadın olmak ne demeyi tartışmamız lazım. Ama önceki panelde de değerli konuşmacılar bahsettiler. Bu kültürün aslında çok önemli bir gerekliliği var. O da kolaborasyon dediğimiz paylaşım, birbirini dinleme. Ancak bu paylaşmayla birlikte ve bir harmoni yaratarak, birbirine destek olarak ancak bu kültürün yaratılma gerekliliği var. Bu da biz kadınların çok doğal bir şekilde her an etrafımıza yaydığımız ve yaptığımız bir şey. Bu anlamda ben hem bu global değişimin, hem teknoloji değişiminin hem de bu gereklilik kişisel, kültürel değişimin aslında kadınlar için son derece eşitleyici, eğer bunu içselleştirebilirler ve kültür seviyesi, düşünce perspektifi itibariyle kucaklayabilirlerse koşa koşa öne çıkabilecekleri, olanaklar yaratabilecekleri bir dünyaya gittiğimizi, var olduğunu da düşünüyorum. Şimdi 2004 yılından beri ben Kadın ve Bilişim platformunun kurucusuyum ve bu konuda Türkiye'de ve bölgede bir şeyler yapmaya çabalıyorum. Burada gözlemlediğim değişimi şöyle anlatayım size. İlk bir araya geldiğimiz zaman kadınlarla bulunduğumuz nokta bir ev hanımının çocuklarım bilgisayar kullanıyorlar, beni yanına yaklaştırmıyorlar, kendimi çok kötü hissediyorum, bana ne olur bilgisayar kullanmayı öğretin diye 2004 yılındaki işte o civardaki yılları bir bakıma öyle geçirdik biz aslında. Ondan sonraki değişimde gelen kadınlar biz bunu kullanmayı biliyoruz da nasıl para kazanacağız bununla diye sordular ve onları teknolojiyi kullanan ama işi için kullanan insanlar haline getirmekle uğraşmaya başladık. Şimdilerde de birbirlerine nasıl destek olabilirler ve birbirleriyle iş nasıl yapabilirler ve sosyal medyayı ve interneti kazandıkları katma değeri arttıran bireyler olarak nasıl kullandıracağız onlara üzerine geldik. Düşünün bir 8-10 yıl içindeki aslında iletiştiğimiz kadınların seviyeleri birbirinden çok farklı değil. Ama onların mental değişimlerini gözlemledim. Yıllardır böyle topluluklarda anlattığım bir örnek var. O kendini geliştirdikçe ben onu anlatmaktan hiç yorulmuyorum. Tarımsal pazarlamayı kuran sevgili Tülin tanıştığımızda 24 yaşındaydı, şimdi ilerledi, milyonlarca dolarlık şirketi var. Artık koşa koşa gidiyor, haftaya bir etkinlikte kendisine ödül veriyor olacağım, düşünün, en başarılı girişimci hanım olarak ve bu girişimi başarabilen Adanalı kızımız var bizim ülkemizde. Övüne övüne, göğsümü gere gere her gittiğim ülkede bunu ona anlatıyorum. Ama sadece bizim ülkemizde yok bu insanlar. Kenya'da da var bu insanlar, Güney Afrika'da da var, Fas'ta da var, Tunus'ta da var, Birleşik Arap Emirlikleri'nde de var, Ürdün'de de var. Önemli olan bu gelişen dünyanın içinde bu kadınlar hem birbirleriyle hem erkeklerle hem de bu yaratılan sanal diyeceğim ama hiç de sanal olmayan ve milyarlarca doların var olduğu, internetin üzerinde yürütüldüğü ekonomik değerin parçası bir an önce nasıl olabilecekler ve bizim üzerimize ne gibi bir görev düşüyor toplumun liderleri olarak, şirket öncüleri olarak, bu odanın içinde hepinizin bu işe gönül vermiş insanlar olduğunuzu ve onun için burada olduğunuzu biliyorum. Hep birlikte bu ellerinden tutup bu ekonominin parçası, internetin parçası, teknolojinin parçası bu kadınları bir an önce nasıl yapacağızı düşünüp bulup çabalamamız gerekiyor. Bu anlamda bizim işte bir 8 yıldır değişen farklı farklı etkinliklerimiz var. Bunlarda binlerce kadını eğittik, eğitmeye devam edeceğiz. Ama gözlemlediğim şey eğer olanak verilirse bugünün gençleri bizim çok çok ilerimizdeler. Onları bir adım yukarıya o gücü ve kendilerine olan güvenci, inancı ancak sağlayarak koşturtabiliriz. Onun için çabalamaya devam etmemiz gerekiyor. Teşekkür
Aslında
ederim.
buradan güzel bir geçiş olacak. Çünkü ekonomi çevrelerinin kadını nasıl sisteme dahil edebileceğiyle ilgili olarak belki Sayın Michaela Bergman, 3. konuşmacımız, kendisi finans dünyasından bir kadın lider, bize bunları anlatabilir diye düşünüyorum. Çünkü kendisi 7,5 yıldır çok ilginç bir iş yapıyor. Avrupa İmar ve Kalkınma Bankası'nın sosyal konular baş danışmanı kendisi ve bankanın politikalarını cinsiyet eşitliği konularıyla uyumlulaştırma konusunda sorumlu. Dolayısıyla biz özelde kendi bankasının ama genelde finans kuruluşlarının, bankaların, fon kuruluşlarının bu cinsiyet eşitliği meselesiyle neden bu kadar ilgilendiğini, piyasaların kadın potansiyeline nasıl baktığını ve neden yatırım yaptığını öğrenmek istiyoruz. Kendisinden bunu dinleyeceğiz. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I'm going to do a PowerPoint because I've got quite a lot of information to give you and I think I can talk over it. So here goes. So you're really wondering why EBRD would think about gender and why it's important. So I thought before I talk about that, I'll just tell you what EBRD is. We're owned, oops, it doesn't work, excuse me. Okay, so we're, could somebody help me please? Okay, yeah, so we are a bank that's owned by 61 countries, AAA rating. We work in a lot of 29 countries, and we have a slightly different mandate. Can somebody just do this? Okay, so we originally set up to help the transition from post-Soviet countries and to promote market economies and entrepreneurship. And we've now expanded to both Mongolia, then Turkey, and now some of North Africa. Which is where we're different from other financial institutions like the World Bank or the African Development Bank, is that we actually have a mandate to promote private and entrepreneurial initiatives. So this is one of the things that we really concentrate. How can we get money into the market to enable entrepreneurship and business? And so what we do is we provide money to both financial institutions to then on lend, and we also finance projects and investments in the fields of municipal services, natural resources, which we call oil and gas, in transport, and also in manufacturing. So just to let you know, in Turkey, we've done quite a lot of work in Turkey. We haven't been so long in operation, but we've worked a lot in the financial sector, power and energy, and municipal sector finance. So when I joined the EBRD 7 years ago, and I said, well, because I'm really a social development specialist, I'm an anthropologist, and I said, well, what are we doing about gender? They said, well, there are no gender issues in this region. This is the transition region. And, you know, there are no issues. So, you know, the first 2 years you keep quiet and you think, right. And then you begin to notice that actually things aren't quite as they were. You see women, if you look at the statistics, dropping out of the labor force, for example. And so I started saying, well, I think there are issues. And then some of our donors or our owners sort of said, like the Canadians in the UK, I think you ought to look at gender. And then the people saying, well, there's no gender issues, really, it's banking, we're business. This has nothing to do with gender. Anyway, so we were actually forced, I should say, to develop a gender action plan. And during that period, we started doing some small projects to try and address what we thought were gaps, where there were problems with gender. And we are now about to develop a strategy. But why do we do it? You could say, on a theoretical level, we found that actually there are transition gaps, that we aren't achieving our mandate. There are gaps in the labor market. We are not reaching men and women equally in the investments we make. You could also say that women's rights are human rights, and EBRD has a human rights mandate. But we could also say there's an economic and business case, and that is what I'm going to talk to you about. What we know is that there are what we call gender gaps, both in access to services. So, for example, when people are designing municipal services, who do they ask about what they want? Do they ask the men or the women? It's mostly the men, but you'll find there are quite a lot of differences. For example, if you're doing a road project, if you're doing an urban upgrading project, and you ask the men, what do they want? They want better roads. Why? Because they can drive their cars faster. What do the women want? They want better pavements, because they use the pavements more. They want street lighting, because it's safer. And the idea is actually a lot of what we were doing our investments, we realized were actually not reaching men and women equally. The benefits were not reaching them equally. Access to finance. There is a lot of evidence, I'm not going to tell you all here, that women do not have the same access to credit as men. It can be for a variety of reasons. It can be because of behavioral things, so the people at the banks don't treat women with the same respect as they do men. It can be because they don't have the collateral. It can be because they don't have the confidence. It could be many reasons. It could be because the legislation is wrong, but there are gaps. And then in terms of access to employment, I want to show you this. You see the gap? You see where Turkey is between men and women? Women are not in the formal labor market. Why? Why, you may ask. And that's another reason we realize that actually we have to do something about this. And then the other interesting thing is, look at the pay gaps. They're quite considerable, and I think that's universal. But we have in our policy, actually, on our environmental and social policy, that men and women should be equal, receiving equal pay for equal work. But the data doesn't support that. So I'm going to try and just tell you what sort of things that we do and how we do it. We worked with Edo. I think some of you from Istanbul will know Edo, the ferry company. And as you know, they were privatized last year, and EBRD was part of that, was financing it. What we found when we did the due diligence at Edo was that there were 17 women and 637 men, maybe as it should be. The other thing, which is the interesting thing, was recruitment. Where did they go to recruit? They went to ask their male friends. And they never went to the universities, and there are universities here that teach marine engineers. So what it realizes is that EBRD has to work better with our clients to see how are they actually recruiting people. How are they recruiting? And then, as we go back to our access to finance, we've been working with our client here, Guarantee Bank, to develop what we call a dedicated credit line for women entrepreneurs that's easy for them to access, that they know about, and then we're supporting training and backup support. For whatever reason, women are not accessing credit to the same level as men, and so this was the reason we thought this was an important thing to do. Sorry, oops. Oops, sorry. I wanted to show you a cartoon, but this isn't working very well. Now, I don't know if you can, I was asked to talk about leadership. And I don't know if you can read it, or if anybody can translate it. What it says is, as you can see, there's the one lady in the boardroom and the 5 men, and it says, "That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men would like to make it." So, what is it? Why are we still here in all these years? Why is it still happening? Because I can tell you at EBRD, it still happens. And we can think of different reasons, and we've been trying to think about it a lot. And I think that to try and get gender equality in the workplace and in leadership, we've got to treat it like any other business initiative. You've got to have a plan, you've got to measure it, you've got to implement it. You've got to ask for the data, because as we've been talking about the left brain and the right brain, the men want to see the data. So when you can tell them, well, look at the number of women that are at this position and look at the number of men, they actually digest it differently. You need to establish a culture of sponsorship. You need to support the women. And you need to raise awareness of what a diverse work environment looks like. And going back a bit to the question I said, that you've got to engage with men. You've got to talk to them and explain to them why they think why it's good for them. Why is it good for them to have gender equality in the workplace and work with women? And they have to see a benefit too, like we all do in some ways. They operate differently, as we've been saying about the left and the right brain and the other presenters. And then, since I am in Turkey, I wanted to challenge somebody who could tell me who said this. The reason for the lack of success of our society lies in the indifference towards our women. One of the ways to ensure a powerful nation is to make sure our women are competent in every aspect. For that, our women will acquire scientific and technical information and complete every phase of education that men complete. Thus, women and men will walk side by side in social life, helping and protecting each other. It was Ataturk in 1928. So I leave you with that, and thank you.
Thank you. Güzel prezentasyon için Sayın Bergman'a teşekkür ediyoruz. Herhalde Sayın Bergman'ın gösterdiği karikatürdeki durumu yönetim kademelerindeki salondaki birçok kadın yaşamıştır. aynı sıkıntıları paylaşmıştır diye düşünüyorum. Şimdi aslında kendi fikrini ya da hayalini bir erkeğin yapmasını beklemeyip kendi gerçekleştiren bir kadın lider var aramızda. Sayın Meryem Rukavina Spetic, Hırvatistan merkezli Cinsiyet Çalışma Grubu Gender Task Force'un hem kurucusu hem genel direktörü. Onunla vizyonu nasıl gerçeğe dönüştürdüğünü konuşacağız ve onun yanında uluslararası kuruluşlarının ve yerel sivil toplum kuruluşlarının kadın hakları ve rolleri konusundaki zihniyet değişiminde nasıl rol alabildiklerini konuşacağız. Buyurun.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me first to just greet you all and tell you that it's a pleasure to be here again in Istanbul, in particular to be a guest of KAGİDER in such an important summit. It's a great honor. And then maybe to just give you a little bit of background about how I've come here to sit here before you today. Namely, I have a sort of diverse background. I was born in France, raised in America, and I am of Croatian descent and currently live in Croatia. And since the 90s, I have been active in working with women's organizations, civil society organizations, and more specifically what brought me to this part of the world was the moment of conflict, the moment of violent aggression that took part in the Balkan countries. And I spent a lot of time at the bad end of those kind of conflicts, working with the survivors of the various forms of violence. And this taught me one important lesson, and this was that it's not, while it's very necessary for us women to take care of each other and to support each other in very difficult times, it's also very important to be in the place where you can prevent such things from happening again. And to learn a lesson and to support women and to build upon our strengths and to make sure that we are always there for each other. So this is sort of a little bit of my background. However, what brings me here more specifically today is the fact that I'm the co-founder of the Gender Task Force. The Gender Task Force was started in 1999 in Sarajevo. And it was it was actually, I think, no one has to date told me that it hasn't been, so I will tell you that it is such, that the Gender Task Force was established as a precedent in women's organizing in the world. Namely, women usually figure out that something important has taken place and then decide to, and then realize that they are not a part of such a process and then get organized and try to get inside or try to influence those that have already done much of the work. This is usually our way of working. In the case of the Gender Task Force, we actually caught on to a new process being prepared in Southeast Europe to bring stability, prosperity, and democracy to the Southeast European countries. And we decided not to wait for them to form, for the men, of course, the male leaders of the region, to form something and then for us to say, look, there are no women and let's include gender, etc. We actually formed the first regional organization of the Stability Pact for Southeast Europe, which was the Gender Task Force. Before the men even figured out how to do regional cooperation, we were doing it already. And we said, look, we have a working body that is doing regional cooperation, and therefore it should be incorporated into the future Stability Pact, and so was the case. The Gender Task Force, which was an ad hoc, largely connected by emails, by telephone, we're not meeting with each other, we didn't have such funds available. We were linked to each other through our activist work. At that time, some of the women influencing our Gender Task Force strategy were women in refugee camps, women in parliaments, in trade unions, in different aspects of political or business life. Who joined together with a common agenda and said, we want to take responsibility for the development of our countries from now on, because until that point, in many countries of Southeast Europe, the representation of women was approximately 2%, 3% in parliaments. It was very common to see governments without a single woman. And so this was absolutely, of course, unacceptable. And we said, no, from now on we will share the responsibility, but we want also to participate actively. So in those first years, in let's say 99 and 2000, 2001, it was most important to politically, to be somewhere, to be in the places where the decisions are made, because that was definitely missing. We also helped to establish many gender mechanisms, as we call them, bodies in parliaments and in governments to make sure that someone is paying attention to gender equality. And we developed a lot of innovative programs for how to get women politically active in areas where politics was a dirty word. I dare to say that in some places it still is a dirty word in our region, but it's much less dirty than it used to be. And women are getting more active, and it takes a lot of work. We had innovative programs sharing information and training and empowerment all at the same time, because we didn't have a lot of time and money to waste. So we trained thousands of women with empowerment and linked them together and taught them how to lean upon each other and create strategies through networking, which was one of the few resources that they had available to them, to enter into political parties and to try to change them. It didn't happen all. It's not a success story fully, but what is definitely the case was that there was a great improvement in women's participation. This was mirrored by a process that we call the sandwich strategy, which was influencing, and I come now to maybe your point about international organizations. It's important that women working from the grassroots level feel support also from the international or from upper levels. And when those 2 points meet on any given theme, changes can happen very quickly, more quickly than is natural. Earlier today we had a discussion about quotas, for example. We decided in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a number of women activists working in international organizations and strong women leaders from Bosnia and Herzegovina to make a quota happen. And in 1998, entered into the temporary legislation that was in place at that time, the electoral legislation. At that time, it was a question of, do we wait for things to happen naturally, for us to take power naturally, get into positions? And analysts made a study at that time and figured out that if we wait for things to happen naturally, it will probably take about 200 years for women in Bosnia and Herzegovina to reach equal positions in parliament or in decision making. So we decided to kind of speed up this so-called natural process and helped a quota to come into the electoral legislation, which ensured that women entered into candidate lists, and then later, of course, in higher numbers entered into other bodies. This had a spillover effect, and this is also one of our positive practices that we were able to take advantage of. And that is that if one country is doing something, or if someone is doing something, it's much easier to ask, if you're in the neighboring countries, it's much easier to tell them, hey, look at your neighbors going forward, and maybe you can copy them, instead of always looking, and I hope nobody takes offense, but always looking to some Nordic examples, very far away, Sweden and Norway, where everything looks wonderful and nice, and the statistics are very, very, very, very good looking. We have to sometimes look to imperfect examples, but realistic examples for us. So when you see a country that's really not much better off than you are, taking steps forward in some regards, it was easy then to use, let's say what we like to call, we call it sujeta in Croatian. It's something like a male, it's not exclusively a male characteristic, but it's oftentimes used by them. It's kind of like an ego matter. So if they feel like their neighbor is going ahead of them and he's not moving in the same direction, he's going to make the same steps and he's going to try and go one step further to show he's better than his neighbor. So we use these kind of tactics, new ways of approaching things to get a lot of male-dominated governments to make changes that were very good for women, to start to improve some of the legislative and other frameworks. So this is not necessarily affecting women's everyday life, but it was starting to make the foundation for what could then start to change our lives. Because when you get into decision making, when it's possible to actually have influence, and I should also mention that at every moment we were always trying to interlink not just top down and bottom up, but also horizontally, making sure that we were always seeking support from very different arenas, from the media, from the trade unions, from the universities, and all available people that were willing to push forward, public people who supported such a cause. So in this way we developed a positive framework. I should say that Since 2010, our priorities have included rural development and women's entrepreneurship, which brings us here in a very specific matter and in good relations with KAGİDER. We are starting now this year already a new project for 9 countries of Southeast Europe to work on women's entrepreneurship. We're not the only ones working, of course. We want to actually build upon the good practices and synergies that exist already nationally, regionally, and internationally. And our hope, and I think this kind of maybe resonates with something we heard earlier today, is that we build up in each country and then much in a broader way a platform for women's entrepreneurship, which would include all positive actors that want to advance the agenda. So it could be financial institutions, and it could be chambers of commerce, and it could be women politicians and men politicians, why not? But also more specifically those that are working every day on this issue and trying to advance their agenda, to create a partnership with the governments to make things move quickly, more quickly. So this is kind of our role, I would say, of the Gender Task Force, is always playing a sort of intermediary role and trying to build up on what is already existing.
So you are exceeding the time.
Okay, I'm finished,
No,
and
no,
I'm very open to, of course, discussing with you. This was what I was looking forward to, especially being the last speaker after a long, long day.
Thank
to
you.
not keeping you, to not bore you too much, but to be very open to a discussion with you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now at the second part, we are going with the questions from me and from the salon. Since I'm the journalist, I'm always being curious, so I'd like to ask you if any of you had encountered any obstacles for just being a woman through your professional lives, and how did you handle it? You can go with it. Ms. Bergman.
Obstacles, yes, but I also think that the way that what a woman does and how if a man and woman can do the same thing, and you're described differently. So in the same way that, the Prime Minister of England, Margaret Thatcher, when she was, being very determined in what she'd say, they say that she was nagging or she was hectoring. A man would be, determined, insistent, precise. If Margaret Thatcher, for example, and I've had the same, said the same thing again and again, she would be nagging. A man would just be remembering his message. And I've been told, in the same thing in my time, either I use my hands too much. How often does a man get told that they use their hands too much? I have a loud voice. How often, and I do have a loud voice, but how often does a man get described, told that he has a loud voice? Yeah. It's these little things that are continually undermining. You have to have a much better sense of humor being with a woman. You have to know when to take it. So I think there are differences, and I'm not going to go into complete details, but absolutely. And it's these little things that grind at you the whole time. And maybe it's in different sectors, but I certainly think that you find it.
Maybe I can give the example. When I first joined the board of the Europe for the Intel board, everybody, 18 men, they're all from US, Germany, Western Europe. I'm the only woman, only 30-ish-year-old woman, Muslim from Turkey, emerging markets, the whole shebang, you can imagine. The whole demographics that don't fit anything. Any of them. I think it took me something like 8 months before I could say a sensible sentence, because I was so taken aback with what am I doing here with these people, and why would they listen to me at the first place? And then what I learned was the more you speak, the more power to you. And the more power you have, you speak more. The more you speak, more they listen. So it's a cycle.
So don't be afraid to speak, you say.
Exactly.
And Zirve?
I love what you're saying. It's sort of a feedback loop. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face when we talked in the earlier session about needing to have mandates to ensure that women were put forward, that we ensured there were a certain number of women on boards, there was a certain number of women in various sectors. The flip side of that is when someone looks at you and says, you're only in that position because we had a quota to fill. So as an Indian woman growing up in the United States, I've faced my entire life this underlying question around the successes that I've had, well, what happened to you that got you there to begin with? And so I think that's one of the things that I've really worked very hard to I guess, strip away or to identify for people, is that I am where I am through the hard work, the loud voice, the moving hands, the tears and the guts and all of that, that it has nothing and everything to do with who I am as an Indian woman. So I love what you're saying about owning that power and moving from a place where you do feel confident and you do feel strong. And I'll just add one thing to that, which is I also think being in the presence of other women helps us foster this. And one of the things I attribute to, I think, being a strong woman in the world is being educated in university, in a women's university. And so seeing around me all kinds of examples of women who were powerful in the world and feeling very clearly that I could be one of those women too.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Passage?
Okay. I would probably just add that having women's networks to back you up and to just sort of share what's going on sometimes is very important in those kind of mixed situations or places where you feel you've been somehow treated differently because you're a woman. We have sort of internal language amongst the colleagues I've worked on in empowerment programming, where we call these domination techniques, and we actually have numbers for them and names for the different types of techniques that oftentimes men use against us to keep us down. And when you can name what is being done to you, and when you can then perhaps even alleviate it by using other kinds of techniques, then you're much more powerful than you are when you're just feeling always victimized by something. So it's very important, I think, to use our women's networks, inform each other, share our tactics with each other very openly, and always, of course, even take a chance and support another woman in a difficult situation, because that person will be there for you when you need them as well.
So what are the biggest obstacles to a women's leadership? Men, other women, or the gender norms? So,
what are the obstacles?
Biggest obstacles to a women's leadership?
In the case, in very practical terms, it's usually the fact that there are no new seats. The seats that we want are already there, and a man is sitting in those seats.
Yeah.
And so usually you have to move a man to get into a position. And we women usually prefer, it's much easier to move a woman than it is to move a man, and so we go against our women colleagues to take that position because it's easier. I'm speaking in general terms. We have to figure out strategies about how to get a man out of a seat if we want there to be more of us, I think, somewhere.
Because like in the caricature, women are always producing the projects and men are executing, right? It's like...
They'll turn it on when you start speaking.
Okay, fine. I think one of the classic things is when you see a job advert, and a man will look at it and he reckons he can do 40% of it, and he'll apply and say, I can do it. A woman, generally speaking, will want to be able to do 101% and perfectly. And they've shown, if you look at, there's a lot of research to show that women don't put themselves forward because they don't have the confidence, and for very many other reasons, and also because their whole approach to the issue is different. So I think you've got to really, the way people recruit and how you understand the whole recruitment process to encourage women to put themselves forward. I think that's a real, step that has to be done. I mean, as to what the blockages, I think they're manifold. I think they're various. I think there's the cultural, but I also think that sometimes women don't want the package that comes with leadership because maybe they have other priorities in their life, rightly or wrongly. I think, the style that we have often of leadership is very male formulated. It's about being aggressive, it's about not being consensual. And maybe some women just don't want a part of that. And so I think there are lots of different reasons. And I also think certainly in the UK, or female politics, for example, the fact that your personal life is spread all over the media and everything is not a price that many women are necessarily willing to pay, but men might be. So I think there are lots of reasons. I don't think there's one reason. And yeah.
Sayın konuşmacılar birçok konudan bahsettiler. Kadının kariyerinde ilerlemesine köstek olabilecek o kadar fazla şey var ki, kültürel, sosyolojik vesaire, ama bu esnek çalışma konusuna ben değinmek istiyorum. Benim gördüğüm kendi kariyerimde ileriye ittirmeye çalıştığım ve kariyerlerini kendim ilerledikçe ilerletmeye çalıştığım kadınlardaki aile sahibi olup işi birlikte yürütebilme problemini nasıl çözecekleri konusu. Burada tabii hem şirketlere hem de çalıştıkları kurumlara çok büyük yük düşüyor bence. Bir örnek vermek istiyorum. Bizim eski Türkiye Genel Müdürümüz, şimdi de benim için bütün bölgenin kurumsal işlerini, iş geliştirme müdürlüğünü yapan hanımefendi. 3 çocuğu var ve kendi Ankara'da yaşıyor. Eşinin de aynı kendisi kadar çok ciddi, büyük bir işi var. Bu anlamda esnek çalışma saatlerini çok başarılı bir şekilde uygulayabilen bir elemanımız kendisi ve koşa koşa kariyerindeki adımlarla hızla yukarıya doğru çıkıyor her yıl ve destek oluyoruz kendisine. Şöyle birkaç kuralımız var mesela bizim Çiğdem'le uyguladığımız. Ben hiçbir zaman onu akşamleyin saat 6 ile 11 arası aramam, asla. Çocuklarıyla ailesinin saatidir. Gece 11'de herkesi yatırdıktan sonra telefonun başına geçer Çiğdem. Biz de 12.30'a 1'e kadar gene işlerimize patır patır devam ederiz. Sabahları gene 8 ile 9.30 arası asla konuşmayız, toplantı set etmeyiz. Ondan bir şey istemeyiz. Ama onun dışında da gece gündüz çılgınlar gibi çalışır. Biliriz ki o saatleri de ona aittir. Bu esnekliği iş yerinin verebilmesi gerekiyor bütün çalışanlarına.
Bu şirketinizin bir polisisi mi, yoksa hani bir kadın dayanışmasından, birbirinizi anlamanızdan gelen bir uygulama mı? Ben merak ettim açıkçası.
Şimdi çok güzel bir soru bu. Çünkü ben kendi şirketimde de aynı zamanda bu cinsiyet eşitliğinin Avrupa'daki liderliğini sürdürüyorum ve yaklaşık 8 yıldır bu konuda biz çok ciddi yapısal değişiklikler getirdik şirketin içinde. Şimdi biz artık yönetim kurulunda 2 kadınız. Bir kadınken başka, 2 kadınken başka, biliyorsunuz. Her şey değişiyor birdenbire. Yönetim kurulundaki sayınız 2'ye çıktığı anda birdenbire güç sizde olabiliyor ve sizi dinliyorlar artık. Başka 2 yaratık mı diyeyim, ne diyeyim, dinlenmesi gereken insan topluluğu var gibi bir şey oluşuyor. Ve orada biz yaklaşık 4 yıl önce esnek çalışma koşullarını şirkete kabul ettirdik. Ve burada önemli olan yaptığınız iş hangi saatlerde nerede olduğunuz değil bir. İkincisi, yarı zamanlı çalışmanın değerlendirilip olanaklı kılınabileceğini şirkette var ettik. Ama zaten teknoloji şirketi olduğumuz için son derece hiyerarşik olmayan bir düzende daha çok ölçülme yöntemlerinin de başarının, performansın da aslında sonuçta elde ettiğiniz sonuçlara bakarak var olduğu bir şirkette çalıştığım için zaten doğal olarak hiç zor olmadı bunları uygulamak, ama ikisi tabii ki birlikte gidiyor. Yani hem biz kadın liderlerin bunu ciddiye alıp kendi kurumlarımızda ittirmemiz lazım, hem de biraz da teknolojinin olanaklarını çalışanlarımıza var etmemiz lazım ki bu nimetlerden yararlansınlar.
Ama biraz sizin durumunuzda bir kadın lider olarak yarattığınız bir fark söz konusu. Çünkü çoğu zaman erkeklerin desteğine ihtiyaç duyuluyor böyle konularda. Çünkü erkekler halen ne yazık ki çoğunluk hep yönetim şeylerinde. Ben de medya ortamındayım. Yani çok kadın çalışan olmasına rağmen yönetici olarak çok az kadına rastlıyoruz. Dolayısıyla burada erkekleri bu konuda eğitmekte ne yapılabilir? Belki hem siz bu konuda yaşadığınız tecrübelerden bize örnek verebilirsiniz. Mesela yönetim kurulunda hani bunu nasıl ikna ettiniz erkeklerin bu esnek çalışma saatlerinde? Belki Sayın Bergman da bu konuda bize bir şeyler söyleyebilir erkeklerin desteğine duyduğumuz ihtiyaç konusunda.
I think that, well, number one, I think you actually often have to just appeal on the personal level and think, you know, these men must have wives, they might have husbands too, wives, daughters or sisters, and, you know, do they have, you know, what are they facing?
It's better if they have working wives.
And my point is, I work for a man whose wife has probably a better paid more senior position than he does, and he has to do a lot of the childcare. So our whole department within where I work is very flexi-time oriented. But I think it really depends on, you've got to have somebody to promote it. We have a new president at EBRD who is also, very supportive. But it's a culture change, and we still have, people at the bank that, are more old-fashioned. But I think it's nowadays, you've got the technology to do it. It's not like years ago. But I can always remember I used to work at the Asian Development Bank in Manila, and you used to see these Japanese young men staying all night there because they were measured on how many hours they were in the office. And, and it was, even more, it was great if they could show they'd slept all the night there, with their crumpled suit. So, but I think things have changed. I mean, we complain a lot, but when you think about how things were 20 years ago, we are moving, and it takes a while to create culture change. And again, I also think it very much depends on the sector. I mean, I think, IT sector is very different, financial institutions is different, it does depend. But one of the things that we ask our clients is to promote what we call flexible working, work-life balance. So, can people, one of the obstacles people will have in progressing their career, women for example, is that the training can be provided after hours at 6 o'clock in the evening. And that's a real disincentive for women to do the training. Why can't training be done, either remotely or done at another time? It's things like that we encourage our clients to do. So, we're promoting it in a small way, but I think change takes a while to happen. It doesn't happen overnight for it to be really internalized.
Is something that occurs through what I was mentioning earlier about co-opetition. When we as women, or all of us in this room, start to take those steps and say, we will rise as an industry, as a sector, as a community together, it starts to shift the tone. And this is also what globalization and technology have brought us, exposure to what's going on all over the world, and opportunities to better understand work practices in different countries, in different socioeconomic groups, in different sectors. And I would say that the way one of the biggest things that we can do to start to shift the culture is exactly what Marianne was talking about earlier when she said the examples that we needed to show, even if they were imperfect, were the ones right beside us. That, psychologically, that's what we respond to. So it's great if I am, sitting in, here in Istanbul and hear about something in New Delhi, India, but the truth of the matter is I need it to be right here. I need it to be on my street, on my block, for me to feel like I can actualize it too. So the more we take even imperfect steps towards this kind of change, the better we'll be.
I also think there's a generation shift. I mean, when I was starting my career, we really had to work. We were always trying to be better than the men, and many of us sacrificed our personal lives. But I now see a lot of the young women that work for me is actually they're not prepared to make those sacrifices anymore. They want, they want to balance things, and they demand it more than I ever dared to.
Thank you. Salondan soru var mı? Lütfen.
Çok teşekkür ederim. İsmim Dilek Cindoğlu, akademisyenim, sosyoloğum. Şöyle bir sorun var. Çeşitli sektörlerden geliyorsunuz. İşte gazetecilikten, IT'den, siyasetten, finans sektöründen ve flex time'dan bahsettiniz. Şimdi flex time gene de haftada işte herhalde 40 saat değil mi, minimum çalışmayı öngören bir şey. Yani bu 40 saati yani hiçbir zaman 40 saat değil tabii o 40 saat ama neyse özellikle profesyonel seviyede bunu günün ya da haftanın belli saatlerine dağıtmaktan bahsediyoruz. Bir de daha az bahsettiğimiz ve kadınların özellikle benim bildiğim kadarıyla Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde çok daha fazla talep ettikleri half time diye bir şey var. Acaba sizler kariyerlerinizde, sizler olduğunuz yöneticilik pozisyonlarında bu kadınların half time yani iş paylaşma, işin yarısını alma gibi yani aynı pozisyonu, aynı müdürlüğü, aynı işte CEO'luğu en azından belli bir süre için aile sorumlulukları nedeniyle çoğu zaman 2 kişi tarafından paylaşılması şeklindeki bir iş organizasyonuna ilişkin Gözlemleriniz varsa paylaşırsanız çok teşekkür ederim.
Bu bizim demin örneğini verdiğim bu yapısal değişikliklerden bir tanesi. Intel'in içinde biz 5 yıl önce hayata geçirdiğimiz bunu. Bir çalışan müdürüyle anlaştığı ve belirli bir zaman süreci belirlendiği müddetçe, yani 2 yıl boyunca bunu yapacağım ya da şu kadar yıl, 1 yıl boyunca yapacağım çünkü çocuğum çok küçük ya da eşim şöyle meşgul gibi belirli bir çerçeve çizilerek yapılan bir şey. Bugün bizim finans bölge direktörümüz, kendisi İstanbul'da bir bayan ve kendisi yıllarca, 4 yıl boyunca yarı zamanlı çalıştı Intel'de. Ve her yıl bana sorarlardı, şikayetin var mı? Başkasını sana verelim, sakın dokunmayın ezelime. Hep aynı şeyi söylemişimdir. Ve yıllar içinde aynı öbür bütün kadın çalışanlarımız gibi o da koşa koşa o merdivenleri yükselerek bölgenin finans direktörü olmayı başardı. Ve kızlarını maşallah liseye yolladı. Hepsi artık büyüdüler, rahat rahat bizim gibi 70 saat çalışıyor artık haftada. 40 diye bir şey yok. 40 saat çalışan var mı?
Evet, 40 saat çalışan var mı? Ben de merak ettim şimdi. Salona bak.
Varsa.
Evet, iş kanununa göre öyle, evet. Doğru, haklısın ama evet, gündemi sorusu güzeldi yani. Evet, buyurun.
İyi akşamlar oldu, akşamüstü oldu, evet. Devrim Erol, bir şey sormak istiyorum Michelle'a. Siz Avrupa Kalkınma Bankası'ndan geliyorsunuz. Avrupa Kalkınma Bankası, yani EBRD, IBRD gibi bankaların diğer bankalardan daha farklı olduğunu düşünüyorum ve endişelerinin, ticari endişelerinden çok sosyal gelişmeye de öncelik veren bir endişe olduğunu da düşünmek istiyorum. Zannediyorum da öyle. Siz kadının finansmana erişiminde önemli bir konu olduğunu altını çizdiniz ve de dediniz ki işte biz örneğin Garanti Bankası'yla onlara bir kaynak sağlayarak böyle bir yol açıyoruz dediniz. Şimdi doğaldır ki Garanti Bankası ticari bir kuruluş. Acaba siz sağladığınız bu kaynaklarda bir adım daha öteye giderek bu kaynağın lokal bankalar tarafından kadına iletilmesi aşamasında istenecek garantileri minimize edecek bir sigortalama sistemi, mesela ben finansmancı değilim, mühendisim, getirebilir misiniz? Çünkü özellikle yeni iş kuran kadınların verecekleri bir bilançoları yok ve de genellikle Türkiye'de gayrimenkuller %90 oranında erkeklerin üzerine olduğu için, ben kendi ülkemin gerçeğinden yola çıkarak size bu örneği veriyorum. İpotek olarak, garanti olarak verecek bir gayrimenkulü de yok. Bu son derece önemli bir bariyer, önemli bir kısıt ama siz yine altını çiziyorum, Avrupa Kalkınma Bankası olduğunuz için bir özel sigortalama sistemiyle acaba kadından istenecek garantilerin lokal bankaya bu kaynağı sağlarken risklerini üstlenemez misiniz ki kadına da az risk yansısın?
Okay, firstly, there is a slight difference between the IBRD, the World Bank, and us. We work more with the private sector. And we are, in fact, supposed to be a lender of last resort, so we do lend at commercial rates. We have recognized that there are differences. So, for a start, we have what we call donor-funded or technical assistance programs, where we actually help women, first, prepare balance, business plans, do this so that they are then, and get training so they are in a better position to get a credit. When it comes with microcredit loans, it's not such a problem. It's much more problematic with what we call small and medium enterprises. And so we're just starting. I mean, quite frankly, EBRD never really acknowledged that it was an issue before, until within the last year or so. And that's why, with Guarantee, it's our first project, we're on commercial terms, and like with a good commercial deal, there are, terms and conditions. And, one of them is that, this money is allocated for, women entrepreneurs, and Guarantee Bank will report on that. And then we are providing training. So, there's a covenant in the loan. They can't renege on it. It has to go on that. We are looking at different ways that we can, address the collateral issue. And already we have some products where, first loss, where on more risky enterprises, with donor funding, we can cushion that. So the bank is looking at that. We're doing studies in various countries to see what we can do. But, this is the beginning of a process of developing what I call dedicated products. But it's not only the collateral, it's other things as well. But we're trying to find out. As I say, we're in early stages, but it was only recently that the bank really acknowledged that there was an issue.
Thank you.
Bir soru daha alabileceğiz. Buyurun.
Merhabalar. My name is Kat, and I'm a U.S. citizen, but I live in Kars, Turkey, which, for those of you who don't know, it's completely on the opposite side of the country. And I'm here because I started a small business about a year ago doing honey tasting tours there. And I'm 26, I'm a young entrepreneur, and I'm right now at the intersection of my career. And I'm coming to this kind of summit, similar to what you guys touched upon earlier in terms of tapping into these women networks to try and figure out how I can leverage my small company. And we specifically support small-scale women beekeepers to do our honey tastings. But when I come to these kind of conferences, I'm struggling to try and figure out how this experience is going to help leverage me in my career, how your experiences are going to help me take that transition with the women I'm working with and what I'm trying to achieve. And so I wanted to get a perspective from you all. What do you recommend coming at the end of the first day of this conference? How can this interaction with you guys up there speaking and us out here in the audience, how can we tangibly take what we're discussing and bring that into action points? How can what you guys are doing help me figure out how to take my company to the next level, and how can we bring meaning to all of these conversations we've had all day?
I would start by saying, as I'm speaking, of course, from the perspective of journalism, but tell a really good story. And I don't say this lightly. Everyone in this room has a story, and everyone in this room lives stories. And that's how we connect with each other, and that's how we make meaning of the world. So you're trying to take your business to the next level, and you have chosen to locate yourself in Kars, to work with the beekeepers, to sell this honey for a very specific reason. The way to connect with other people, the way to bring in investment dollars, the way to get more attention for what you're doing, the way to garner customers is to tell a really good story. And there's not ever been a time in history where it's easier to do that. Because of social media, because of the myriad platforms that are available, and the fact that we can now tell our own story, we don't have to wait for a journalist to do it for us, that you really do have the ability to control the narrative and to tell your story in a way that has integrity and will help you grow your business.
My counsel would be to network, network, network. I think in this room, there are women who are investment bankers. There are women who founded their business. KAGİDER is all about that anyway. There are women who have started their own businesses. There are women who know a lot of people. Or there are people, women like me who serve on the board of a bunch of NGOs who's interested in training women and teaching them how to use IT, as an example. So get in touch with whomever you can and try to talk to all of us. This is, I guess, why you're here, and I can't think of anywhere better to be. Congrats, by the way. Great that you came out.
Well, I would say, don't just network with women, network with men too, because you're limiting yourself by 50% of the population. In the same way that, we're saying, why are men, products have always been sent to men, don't limit yourself. I think you don't see yourself as a man or a woman entrepreneur, but as an entrepreneur for a start. And then I think, and maybe this isn't relevant for here, but I mean, just run your company in the way that you would want to, you know, if you're the boss, treat your employees the way that you would want to be treated. You'll get a very good workforce, you'll get a good name, and, you know, and you'll also be able to, I think it's a good way to go.
I would just maybe add, think a little bit outside the box and maybe link up to people maybe outside of your particular field of tourism and natural products, and maybe become more active in empowerment in general in your community, and maybe you would then feel more, maybe the people, you could strengthen the women and the community in general around you and have maybe a stronger base to work from.
Evet, son bir soru. Buyurun.
Ben çok teşekkür ederim müsaade ettiğiniz için. Ben aslında küçücük bir yorum yapmak istiyorum. Bunun üzerine eğer fikriniz olursa katkı sağlarsanız sevinirim. Dün bir meslek eğitim konferansında Kazakistan'dan 8 bayanla tanıştım. 14 kişiydi, 8'i bayandı ve bunların 4'ü yöneticiydi. Ve yöneticilerden birine şunu sordum, yani ne kadar yoğun bir bayan ilgisi var, üstelik Kazakistan gelişmekte olan bir ülke. Bizde çalışmak kadınlar için bir kültürdür dedi. Yani biz çok küçük yaşlarda anne babalarımızdan çalışmanın kültürünü alırız ve çalışmamak gibi bir dünyamız yok dedi. Bunu politikacılar da destekler, Cumhurbaşkanımız da destekler dedi. Bu yüzden ben biraz kadınların iş hayatında var olmasını önce aileden gelen kültür olarak görüyorum ve bir de hep biz kadınlar bir araya geldiğimizde biraz erkeklerle yarışıyoruz. Yani hep diyoruz ki biz erkeklerden daha iyi olmalıyız. Ancak ben 15 senedir iş hayatının içindeyim ve ben her zaman sadece kendimle yarışmayı tercih ettim. Erkeklerin arasında da varlığımı kabullendirmeye çalıştım. Ve birçok alanda da liderliğini yürüttüğüm projeler var. Aslında erkeklerle hiç yarışmak zorunda da kalmadım. Sanıyorum biz kadınlar kendimizi daha iyi ifade edersek, anaç kişiliğimizi biraz daha ön plana koyarsak erkekler dünyasında daha iyi yükseliriz. Diğer türlü iki taraf arasındaki bir yarışa dönüyor iş. Böyle bir yorum yapmak istedim. Teşekkür ederim.
Evet, zaten zihniyet değişimi gereken konu biraz bu galiba. Biz sürekli kendimizi erkekler dünyasına kabul ettirmek zorunda kalıyoruz. Sürekli daha akıllı laflar etmek ve daha düzgün davranmak zorunda kalıyoruz. Halbuki onlar gibi daha normal ve umarsız davranarak da belki bizler de normal kariyerlerimize devam edebiliriz. İnşallah bizim onları değil, onların bizi ikna etmek zorunda kalacağı günler dileğiyle diyelim. Böyle bitirelim çünkü zamanımızın sonuna geldik. Ben konuşmacılarımıza çok teşekkür ediyorum. Salondakilere de sabırları için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Sağ olun.
Biz de size çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Hepinizi ayağa alalım. Would you please stand up? Küçük hediyelerimiz var biliyorsunuz. Şimdi de KAGİDER Başkan Yardımcısı Selma Akdoğan'ı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Şila Gök aramızda. Yetişti, varlığıyla bizi mutlu etti. Şilacığım verecek hediyelerini. Thank you very much for joining us. Efendim bu güzel kareyle 3. Uluslararası Kadın Girişimcilik ve Liderlik Zirvesi'nin ilk gününün sonuna geldiğimizi hemen anons etmek istiyorum sizlere. Sayın Başkanım, değerli KAGİDER üyeleri, katılımcılarımız, hepinize çok teşekkür ediyoruz geldiğiniz için. Şimdi B1 fuayede bir kokteylimiz var. Hepinizi oraya bekliyoruz. İçeceklerimiz var. En önemlisi güzel sohbet var. Kendi alanlarında birbirinden değerli ve kompetan kadınlarla. İyi akşamlar efendim.